I'm gonna skip introductions, and I'm gonna jump off to the first point. The first point is this quote by Shigeru Miyamoto: "Delayed game is eventually good, the rushed game is forever bad." And this is a quote that is incredibly famous with game designers. A lot of people like to quote Shigeru Miyamoto in general. The only problem is that if you're quoting this today, remind yourself that the 20 years or so of game development have changed quite considerably. The ecosystem of the game market is completely digital now. You can launch a great game, actually a terrible game today, and have it be patched the next day. And actually, thinking that this is still valid today would be ignoring the incredible games that have come out of this new digital landscape. And yeah, so context is everything. Quoting, name dropping a famous quote today just because it sounds cool is actually makes not much sense. But actually, a point that I would like to raise is, when exactly did Shigeru Miyamoto say this? Because I've looked everywhere, and if you try to find the source, the exact moment or the exact publication of it, you probably won't find it. If someone finds it, please tell me where it is. The oldest source of it is this vague allusion to it in this article by The Guardian. And actually, if you look at it on Wikiquote, there's actually no source for it as well. And some curators will tell you that he actually never said it. So not only does that make no sense to quote today, if it was valid, but he probably never said it. Let's jump to point 2. I saw a video on A about B, and let me tell you, it usually goes like, I saw a video on extra credits, and here's what we should do, or I saw a video on Game Maker's Toolkit, and here's why you're wrong. And there's a lot of great resources for game design fundamentals out there on YouTube, but not only on YouTube. There's great talks, there's great books. The problem with quoting famous people is often that theory and practice are very different things. If you think of it like that, with this example, usually in game design courses, one of the first assignments that students are given is trying to take a video game and turning it into a board game or a card game. And the reason why this is done is actually to teach students that you can break a game into several mechanics and trying to see the dynamics of it, and breaking them into systems and subsystems. But it's actually done to do actually the opposite, that teaching you that theory and practice are different, that game design is extremely practical, and that it's not because you've made a board game or a card game that you actually are able now to design properly a Mario Kart clone, which is actually not usually the second assignment they give you after that, to teach you that theory and practice is very different. And again, that game design fundamentals aren't everything. You can go really far just with game design fundamentals, and you shouldn't go really far just by name dropping famous people or quoting them. 3, great games are built on great ideas. I've heard a ton of people say that, either directly or with subtext. Like, I'm not telling anyone my idea, someone could steal it. You've heard that a lot, probably. Oh, I have this amazing idea for a game, and the person starts ranting or rambling for an hour. And you've met this person, right? It's not only me. Like, it's that annoying, really annoying person that will not shut up about their idea because they think their idea is everything. And just to make this should be obvious for most people, but a simple equation will tell us that this is not the case, because a good idea with bad execution is a bad game, and a bad idea with good execution is a good game. So let's make some math on it, and basically execution is everything. Not only that, but also execution is everything, and ideas are worthless. I'm sorry if you are this person, but nobody cares about your idea because your idea is worthless. And let's do a small intermission. We've made 3 points so far, and I haven't introduced myself, so I might as well do that now. Those 3 points were more or less to establish tone. My name is Isaac Sanchez. I'm a game designer, a game producer, and also a programmer. I've worked at Infinity Games, doing free-to-play and premium mobile games. I've worked at Siemens, where I designed virtual reality and augmented reality and mixed reality industrial solutions. And I founded Not a Game Studio, where we developed several indie projects. And right now, we just a few weeks ago, we launched HVent Quad. So if you want to know what we are all about, please check us out. But also check out Virtually, where I actually work right now. We are brain training. We work on brain training apps that I actually games, disguised as games. So we basically do cognitive assessment tests, and we put game mechanics on it. And we actually work closely together with neuroscientists, and we balance basically fun and science, and we try to make both things work out for the end user. So why am I giving this talk? The reason why is because I feel that I've worked on so many different fields in terms of fields that like patterns start emerging from for instance comparing mobile to PC to VR, and not only you can see parallels in things, but you can also see a lot of misconceptions because every other field will reveal blind spots about the other one. And so I feel that I wanted to do a talk about misconceptions, either based in pseudoscience or based in folk wisdom that you see a lot in games. Most of what we've covered so far and what we'll keep covering are which should be self-evident, sorry. And we're gonna slow down the pace midway into the presentation and pick it up again. But let's jump back to what we were doing. So your idea is worthless for piracy drives sales. A lot of game designers say this, excuse me. But there's actually no consistent data to support this. Like it might have worked for one game or another, or for many games, but you cannot say a lot about piracy. And 5, streaming drives sales. We actually don't know much about that as well. Like again, there's no consistent data, so no conclusion should be extrapolated from one anecdotal case or another. 6, gamers want, and this one bothers me a lot because it's not usually said like gamers want or players want, or it's usually said as the market wants. It's usually a way of a specific game designer trying to project what they expect a player to do, and usually say again in subtext that they expect the player to be like them. The problem with that is when you're doing that in a brainstorm, or you don't have a persona defined, or you still don't have an audience for a game, saying that basically the question that should be raised is what market specifically are you talking about? Who are you talking about when you say the market wants? Because this is such a broad stroke, right? Like, because there's a lot of nations and a lot of regions, and there's a lot of genders and ages and segments and of demographics. There's actually a lot of platforms with a lot of different price ranges and expectations of features and prices as well. So there's infinite markets, right? So again, who specifically are you talking about? Yeah, 7. Let's go back to 3 just for a moment. And the reason why we're going back to 3 is because I feel that I might not have convinced everyone that ideas are worthless, because this it's usually very hard to convince someone that thinks otherwise that this is true. But probably I haven't convinced that person that will scream their idea for 1 hour in your ear. So instead of me trying to convince you, I'm just gonna put a video of Mark Ken, the team lead of World of Warcraft, saying exactly this. Here's the clip.
You've been a game player, or you've been maybe in another field, you've been a filmmaker or a writer, or you aspire to be a storyteller, or you basically have always just enjoyed games and you want to get started making your own video games. So you basically go, aha, I've got this great idea. No one's ever thought of it before. It's going to be fantastic. I'm going to get in there and I'm going to pitch the idea to the studio, and they're going to be blown away and they're going to make it. Well, I hate to tell you that in all my experience being a CEO of game publishers and game developers, as well as a designer and programmer and artist, that ain't just going to happen that way. It just doesn't. Nobody cares about your idea. That's the cold, hard truth of it all.
So nobody cares about your game idea. This is not actually coming from me. This is coming from someone with much more experience and much more achievements than me. So if you don't trust me, trust Mark Ken. And the reason why we're going back to 3 is to actually comment on this. But Game Idea did idea X and got result Y. Usually something like the Telltale did episodic games and they were a massive success. Or Rockstar opens their trailers with their logo, or Voodoo had a hit with this mechanic. Can't we do a clone? And again, theory and practice are very different, but that's not just it's not just limited to game design ideas, but actually ideas in general, and ideas applied to either producing or marketing your game. Again, context is everything. It's not because an idea worked for a company in a specific context it's going to work for your studio as well, or it's not because a game succeeded in a specific moment or in a specific context is everything, right? That doesn't translate well necessarily to your case. And again, theory and practice are very different. So that was 7. Let's go to 8. Game failed because game failed because is usually very cruel. It's usually something like the creators should have done X, or they should have done Y instead of Z. And it's really cruel because usually what you're saying is that the creators didn't do enough, and also that you have an idea of what they should have done, right? So again, this doesn't make sense because we go back to, and I know that I'm repeating a lot that idea of ideas, but it's not because you have an idea of why a game failed that necessarily, if you were in the shoes of the creators, you would have done otherwise, or you could have done otherwise. So again, context is everything. Practice and theory are very different. 9. Game failed because it's bad. So this is a segue from the previous point. Also, game succeeded because it's good. And it's very similar to the previous topic, but the key difference is this, that usually when a game designer says this, is equating failure with quality or success with quality. And the reverse idea of it is that games that fail are bad games. They fail because they are bad. And games that succeed are good games. And to be honest, two things. One, what is success even, right? Like a successful game can be like, there's a lot of parameters to define success. But if success is really subjective, like if there's this broad stroke that one thing is the other, if you reverse engineer quality through success, then it should be even more abstract, right? Like define good. And another thing of this is usually people who say this completely ignore the ecosystem or the process behind it. And like there's a lot of variables and a lot of moving parts in the success, whatever the metric is, be it sales or critical achievement. There's a lot of moving parts to a game being successful, and ignoring that and just doing one is the other, equating the two things is usually also ignoring that chance plays a big role in whatever you might call success or quality, right? So then, type of game are not real games. And that one, you probably heard that a lot. I hear that a lot. Like, idle games are not real games, or even object games are not real games, or walking simulators are not real games. And I don't really like the term walking simulator. I'm not advocating, I'm just saying that I hear that a lot. And emotional games are not real games. And I also don't like the term emotional game. I'm not advocating emotional game as well, but I'm focusing on that one right now because, like, what are even emotional games? Like, aren't all games emotional? But that was a tangent. Ignore that. Like, mobile games are not real games. You hear that a lot, and usually it's because the game designer in question does not play this type of game, and usually this has something to do with gamer culture as well. But or as is not experienced in developing that type of game in specific. So again, instead of trying to convince you otherwise, I'm gonna go with a clip of Daniel Lutz, the creative director of Hitman Go, one of an incredible game and one of the best games in the Hitman franchise. And yes, I'm just gonna let him speak a bit about in another video about something else, about on how his prejudices against mobile games affected his ability to work, and in the end, the start of his design process with Hitman Go. Here we go.
And so, kind of building on that, we needed an idea for a game. And for that, I decided to be completely stupid and bottom up. The game, I told him, listen, I got this all figured out. I know how mobile games are made. There's only two types of mobile games that need to be made. There's only two types, very simple. And this means, this is probably looking pretty stupid. There's no kind of rational thought behind this. And also looking at it today, believing that there's only two types of mobile games is a pretty silly idea. But I think at the point, at the time we were building this, this was enough of an inspiration, kind of initial spark to get started on something.
Okay, let's do a small intermission again. Again, what I was saying, all these points should be pretty obvious to you. If they're not, I'm sorry. But we're going to focus on stuff that I think has a bit more juice and a bit more meaning behind it. And the next topics we're going to cover after this intermission, where we're going to slow a bit the pace of this presentation, are, for instance, with tutorials for tutorials or crunch culture. But right now, we're going to focus on 10 topics that are a bit different. So, intermission 11. We're going to talk about serious games and entertainment games, persuasive games, and training games. And you've probably heard of these games, right? The idea behind it is that it's that type of game that can change a player, their actions or their behaviors, maybe train a cognitive skill, or either change the biases of either gender or racial or biases. And the idea behind it is that those games are really based on solid science, and that they work because they're based on studies and whatnot, right? No. Let's start with persuasive games. Persuasive games, some studies have shown that persuasive games do not work, sometimes because they give too much agency to players, meaning that they allow a player to do an action that would otherwise contradict the point of the game. And if you look at other studies, they actually say that persuasive games fail because they give too much agency to players, meaning that because they don't allow players to perform actions that contradict that point of that game, those games are not effective. So actually, it's not that there's a middle ground in both. The meaning is that the studies say that it's not very conclusive. It's not persuasive games don't really. We don't know if they really work, and more research should be done on them. What actually works is, or studies have confirmed that some VR games work in changing players. And the reason why that happens is not because they're serious games, but because they are in VR. So, for instance, you might be in a VR setting, talking to an NPC and being recorded as you speak, and just by body swapping with that NPC, the success of simulating, for instance, self-talk is much higher than if you were just recording yourself with a phone. And yeah, so this is actually why we at Virtual Leap are working in VR, because when it's not in VR, it does not necessarily work. When it's done on your phone or on your computer screen, it's not necessarily doesn't necessarily have any results. And to give an example, so if you play Sudoku on your phone or whatever, the problem here is a problem of skill transfer. So by playing Sudoku, you don't necessarily get better at deductive reasoning. You get better at playing Sudoku by playing Sudoku, and that doesn't transfer to anything else. And does that mean that brain training apps don't work? Like, a lot of studies have suggested that in most cases, non-VR brain training apps don't work, and the same could be said as well about training in general, training games, and e-learning in general as well. So we don't really know. We have metrics of it, but it's not really that certain. VR actually works really well, but in most cases, if it's not VR, if it's just with mechanics, it's not very conclusive. So since I've talked about the 3 topics, I'm going to jump 3 points, and we're going to go to Skinner boxes. So what is a Skinner box? If you talk with most game designers, usually Skinner box is not a Skinner box, but a vague catch-all word, term that means any psychological stuff that they don't really understand personally. It's sort of a code word. And you see that a lot, people calling Skinner boxes to whatever uses psychology to condition players. But let's talk about Skinner boxes then. Frederick Skinner is one of the most important persons behind behavior psychology, and even Pavlov as well. Frederick Skinner developed operant conditioning, and Pavlov developed what is now called classical conditioning. And it's more or less the following. The case study for both, or the exemplary case, is in case of Skinner, a mouse inside a box pushing a button, and in the case of Pavlov, a dog hearing a bell. And with the dog hearing the bell, what Pavlov proved was that if a dog would hear a bell whenever he would have a meal, he would still salivate by hearing the bell without any meal. And what actually Skinner proved was that mouse could get addicted to pushing a button, not because food would come out of it, but actually because of the opposite, because food sometimes would come and sometimes wouldn't, right? So to do a terrible simplification out of this, so we might understand the difference between the two, what Pavlov proved was that a certainty of stimuli can be addictive. Of course, this is really not, it's really simplified, but that certainty of stimuli can be addictive, and Skinner, that randomness with stimuli can be addictive. And you actually see a lot of examples of both in video games. And because there's a lot of misconceptions around it, I would like to jump into a few examples, so we might see the difference between the two. By the way, who is right? Both, of course. This a lot of we'll see some examples, but in most cases, games usually use both. So loot boxes, are they Skinner boxes? Yes, loot boxes use randomness, and they are basically Skinner box mechanics. In-app purchases, are they Skinner boxes? And I hear a lot of people calling, for some reason, in-app purchases Skinner boxes. No, they're just in-app purchases. You can a lot of mobile games, for instance, or free-to-play games, use Skinner box mechanics to make you buy more stuff, more in-app purchases. But in-app purchases themselves are not inherently Skinner boxes. You can use Skinner boxes to maximize profit, but to maximize pretty much anything. Talent trees, are they Skinner boxes? No, they're not. Talent trees usually are coupled with a leveling system or an XP system, and if anything, those should be classical conditioning, right? The idea that you by gaining XP you unlock certain items on certain levels. Cookie clicker, is cookie clicker a Skinner box? I've heard also a lot of people say this. It's not a Skinner box. Idle games in general are not Skinner boxes. Again, clicking on stuff and watching numbers go up is classical conditioning. There's no randomness involved in this. Some idle games, a lot of idle games actually, have randomized events, but that's not really the core of what idle games are. So no, in general, they're not Skinner boxes. Appointment mechanics, are they Skinner boxes? No, unless the appointment mechanic itself is random, which for the most part it's not. Roguelikes, are they Skinner boxes? Yes, of course they are, and a lot of roguelikes are built with the intent of being Skinner boxes. Action RPGs, are they Skinner boxes? Again, if you have a leveling system, it's classical condition, but for the most part, action RPGs are really focused on loot, and that has an element of chance, and of course it's a Skinner box. Candy Crush, Skinner box, yes or no? Actually, Candy Crush is so addictive that it could not work if there wasn't some perfect balance of both things operating at the same time. Let's go to 16. Whales, and if you paid any attention to the last few years of mobile games, you've heard that term, whales. It's been featured on an episode of South Park. Even South Park did a parody of it. And the idea of whales is usually a catch-all term to define, or a catch-all term to define a person that is the victim of a predatory tactic. Very like a person that basically is groomed, like if they were in a casino, to be a big spender. It's usually someone that has a predisposition to addiction problems, and so like basically it's this idea that mobile games or free-to-play games or any games that have this type of model are copying, that are very addictive, are copying casinos and targeting people. But the problem with that is that, and by the way, it's usually like the buzzwords are psychology, and psychology in a sense of Jedi mind tricks. But is that right? No, it's not always right. Like if you look at gambling in general, there's a lot of examples of addictive stuff or gambling industries that do not rely on targeting people, right? And that's true for lotteries, true for bingos, and sometimes some games are just naturally addictive to some types of people, right? It's not necessarily that you're targeting specific people. And free to play is a very competitive market. And so, of course, games are designed to be as addictive as possible, but that doesn't necessarily mean that every free-to-play game wants to target whales or works by exploiting whales. It's not black magic. It's not a Jedi mind trick. It's not nothing like it's not a thing like that. And you might ask, okay, but what about gamification? Because basically, what I've just told you is that there's no black magic behind that. We've not cracked the human mind, and we can make with black magic make people do whatever we want with psychology and whatnot. But you will ask, well, what about gamification? Isn't gamification exactly that? Trying to make people do stuff with game mechanics. And so, yeah, what about gamification? Let's do number 17. What about gamification? So in order to understand gamification, we need to talk about PBL, which is points, badges, and leaderboards. And what is PBL, or why is there an acronym for those three things? It's because on its most basic form, gamification relies mainly on those three things only. A lot of gamification is just that. I'm not saying that gamification as a whole is just that. I'm saying that those three things are the main driver of gamification. A lot of it, like a lot of really bad applications of gamification, rely on this. And it's actually not rocket science, so it's actually not that hard to understand, especially for game designers, since a lot of even platforms that we use are so heavily gamified. But maybe I'm not going to convince you of that, and maybe I should have Gabe Zimmerman, a leading expert on gamification, tell you exactly that. And so I'm going to run a clip of him telling you that it's not black magic.
The prevalence of points, badges, and leaderboards, why we see them so often, is because they are effective at creating the first elements of a gamified system. All the different point systems let you understand score and progress. Badges, allow you to manage progress or measure your performance over time and give you something to get excited about, and trophies and so on. And, levels measure progress. Leaderboards allow you to compete. There's a reason why they recur over and over again. So if we're issuing points for everything, if we're issuing badges for everything, if everyone's on a leaderboard for everything and there are levels granted for everything, then won't people be overloaded? Won't gamification stop working or be less efficacious? And I think the answer to that is yes, obviously. And I think, some of the existential angst around PBL and these different game mechanics is worth addressing. And so I want to address that. If the whole world were gamified, then basic gamification systems that only make use of points, badges, and levels or leaderboards, they're not going to have a tremendous effect on people's behavior. Folks will look at that and go, hey, wait a minute. You know what I mean? I'm not impressed by this. This isn't going to take me where I need to go.
So it's not black magic. 18, the Bartle horoscope. You've probably heard of the Bartle, the 4-player archetypes of Richard Bartle. Sorry. It's this partition of different types of players, and it's actually not just 4. It's a bit more complex. It actually comes in a lot of shapes and forms, and to me it's really similar the way it's structured to the Myers-Briggs types as well. But basically, it's everywhere right now, both in gamification and in game design. A lot of people talk about it. A lot of people like to quote it and use it. The problem with the 4, and by the way, before I go to this, a lot of games seem to be either designed or marketed with the 4 archetypes. not necessarily that they're formally based on the 4 players, but if you search for it, you will see pretty much the 4 types a bit everywhere. And the problem with the Bartle types are that they are used, or they only work in massively multiplayer online games, MMOs. Furthermore, they only work in old, massively multiplayer online games. And if you don't believe me, here's also a clip, this time of Richard Bartle himself, saying pretty much exactly that, word for word.
It's a way to partition, well, MMO players of massively multiplayer online role-playing games. It's not intended to work for anything else. It just seems to. What we have with MMOs, it only works in MMOs. I've actually got a proof that it only works in it. Well, I've got a proof that it works in MMOs that doesn't work for anything else. So it really shouldn't work for anything else. But hey, I'm not going to complain. But there seems to be something about it that strikes a chord with other areas. Now, when I formulated these player types, I didn't actually create them to say these are the different things that MMO players find fun. That isn't why I created it. I did it to say MMO players find different things fun. I wasn't saying, look, these are the 4 things which if you follow them, this is what players of MMOs will find fun. Player types is an answer, but the answer has yet to be found. I've given you a hammer, but you've got a screw. I can hit the hammer into the screw in with a hammer very quickly, but you really want a screwdriver. That has to be designed yet. Okay, end of my talk.
Okay, and I didn't end my talk, so we're gonna jump into the next topic. Since we've talked about the 4 types, we're gonna have to talk about gamification again, because a lot of gamification relies heavily on a lot of gamification concepts rely heavily on the 4 types of Bartle. And since we've talked also about PBL, which is a lot of gamification, let's look at leaderboards, for instance. Leaderboards are clearly for the achiever type, and points are clearly for the achiever type as well. Badges are for social signifiers. So they could work for socializers if, I don't know, the badges themselves could help socialization. It's not difficult to implement that, but it's not always the case. And they could interest the explorer type if the badge would somehow a discovery or a surprise. But again, badges are mostly for the achiever type as well. So, right, like gamification, when it comes to its most basic form, even if the 4 Bartle types were valid, which they're not, would be incredibly deficient. So it's definitely not black magic. Going to the next point, flow. And Csikszentmihalyi's flow versus game flow. Here's another clip. Oh, sorry, this is taking...
Challenge-based immersion that's become trickier. Success in this category is marked by a player achieving a psychological state called flow, known colloquially as straight kicking it in the chill station. That's when the challenge of the gameplay and the ability of the player are working in sync. If the challenge is too high, the gameplay gets frustrating. But if it's too low, the player gets bored. When it's appropriately balanced, you become focused and less aware of the outside world, and time just drops away. Now, consider this.
Okay, so you're probably also familiar with the concept of flow. It was actually coined by this man, Csikszentmihalyi, and the idea is, if you're not familiar with it, is a state of where time flies and where you're really focused and everything clicks. Really, really abstract, but very intuitive if you've ever played any video game. And the concept of flow in games was in part popularized by Genova Shen, the creative director of Journey and Flower. It was not the first one to do that, or not necessarily the first one, and not the only one as well. But it is probably the most popular person to bridge Csikszentmihalyi's flow with video games. And what's the problem here, or why is this a topic in my presentation? Because this is actually the graph of Csikszentmihalyi. This is actually what flow is and what's supposed to describe flow. And if you look at it and compare it to this, then you will see that there's a lot of differences and a lot of discrepancies. For instance, arousal comes first than anxiety in Csikszentmihalyi's flow, and control comes first, and boredom, also relaxation. If you look at it, there's a center for this graph, while in here it just grows. And also, like, boredom and anxiety are not even aligned. So the more you think of it and the more you look at it, this is clearly what is described as flow here is clearly not the flow that is here. And why is that the case? So to understand this, we have to go to Genova Shen's thesis. And if you read it, you will come to a really clear conclusion. It's not a thesis in psychology. It's a thesis on game design, and it's a thesis that explores and researches a methodology of difficulty adjustment. So what Genova Shen meant with this thesis was not to say flow is this, but actually we can achieve flow in games with this methodology or with this algorithm. And again, this is why this was turned into this, because for the purposes of the thesis, none of these quadrants, these sections actually are relevant, right? So that in his thesis, a lot of unnecessary variables were just removed, because again, nothing was being commented on that. The problem with this is that now we are stuck with this idea, and the clip that I just showed was from Polygon, and we're stuck with this idea. It's very popularized. We rely on it, but it's a bit of pseudoscience if we take that graph at face value. It's actually a game of broken telephone, and it's splitting out to other areas such as gamification again and UX. So let's stop this intermission. We have still 10 points to cover. So we're gonna go back to the pacing that we were having before, and we're gonna finish the talk, okay? So 21, jack of all trades and master of none. I really hate this phrase, because it's usually said by game designers to be self-depreciative, or to minimize, to be a reductionist of the skills of a game designer. But actually, this quote, this saying is wrong, because the whole saying actually is not that, and actually means the opposite. 22, we need more onboarding. This is actually fine, needing more onboarding, but usually sometimes when game designers say this, what they mean is stuff like, we need to make a tutorial for the UI, or we need to make a tutorial for the tutorial. And I'm not really going to comment on it. I think the sentence, I've heard that a lot actually, and I think this actually speaks for itself. So I'm not going to prove it. 23, game jams are for students, or game jams are for amateurs. I'm also not going to prove this or try to disprove this. I'm just going to answer this claim that I hear a lot as well, with 3 pictures of Pirate Game Jam, which is organized by American McGee and sponsored by companies like Devolver Digital. I think the images speak for themselves as well. 24, there's no such thing as crunch culture. This one is actually sometimes comes in a lot of forms. One of them is that there's no more crunch culture than in other corporate IT environments. And this couldn't be further from the truth, because it's not really about doing crunch. It's about the culture of crunch, the idea that it's really inevitable that you do crunch in order to ship a game. But if that were true, if it was only in corporate environments, in IT in general, then we wouldn't see it so abundantly documented in the indie scene. And it's basically a fallacy that in order to launch a game, or in order to be successful, you need to suffer, right? This is actually what's at the core of crunch culture, and ignoring this is really, really stupid. 25, we need more numbers, and we need more numbers usually is not about adding numbers, but it's about adding numbers when clearly there were other solutions. So numbers in general are really hard to parse. And to give you an example of not when you shouldn't use numbers, which is always, here's an ELF bar, and here's what the ELF bar would be if you use numbers instead of using this intuitive notation. Actually, the reason why casinos work at all is because human beings don't understand numbers. We're very bad at math, but numbers in general, and marketing as well uses numbers to their advantage. Like, we're really, really bad at parsing numbers. And like, even scientists sometimes have this such a massive flow of data that that they need data visualization to understand it. Like, actually, data visualization is a field that is growing immensely. It's an emergent field. So when you're saying that you need more numbers, you're saying that you expect your players to be smarter than most of the scientists in the world. 26. Yes, but can we make a GIF out of it? And you see that being that being said a lot in presentations. There's a lot of people who comment that you should design your game around its GIFability, and it's usually focused on it's advice focused on smaller studios with a smaller budget, to increase their reach on social media, on Twitter in specific, but limiting your design to GIFs. Actually, it's a bit narrow-minded, right? Because, like, there's a lot of great games that have no don't translate well to GIFs, and that actually have been successful, right? So it is a bit narrow-minded. And furthermore, like, why should the benchmark for designing games be an obsolete type of format that actually has a terrible compression, and it's a video format that doesn't have sound, and that takes 10 megabytes to do something that other video formats will do in half a megabyte. So, like, again, designing games with GIFs in mind is a bit narrow-minded. 27, market research. And a lot of people will say, a lot of game designers will say market research, when they actually mean I'm going to a store page and looking at the top sellers. There's nothing wrong with this, but calling it market research is a bit disingenuous. So going to a store page and looking at top sellers is not market research. And you might say, okay, but I don't actually do that. I read market reports and trend reports. I actually receive a lot of reports from big companies, and I'll stop you there. Reading mailing lists with trend reports is not market research. And you might say, okay, but I look at the several games and I try to see the patterns. For instance, we are making an RPG, and like, I've seen all the top sellers RPGs. They have orcs in it, so our RPG should have orcs as well. Making up reasons why games with features in common to yours is not market research. Like, saying why they performed well or didn't is not market research. 28. Hey, I know this is gonna sound crazy, and I know we are mid-development, but maybe we should switch game engines. Have you heard that? I've heard that a lot. 29. Look at some indie game. They spent zero on their marketing budget, and they still sold millions, which is just a rehash of good games sell themselves. So yeah, ideas are worthless. Yeah, we've already covered this. And 30, and final one, I wanted to end this talk with a famous quote by a famous game developer, and I picked that one. Story in a game is like a story in a porn movie. It's expected to be there, but it's not that important. The problem with this quote is that it's sort of a cheap shot, because John Carmack actually distanced himself from that quote several times. So we're actually not gonna finish with that one. We're gonna finish with this one. 90% of what is considered impossible is in fact possible, and the other 10% will become possible with the passage of time. What is the problem with this quote? First of all, context is everything. Like with the first point, I'm going to bookend this, do a bookending with this talk. A lot of people use this quote to sort of avoid seeing that they have holes in their design, that there's design flaws with their designs, or to just ignore technical problems, right? To ignore scope and to ignore obstacles that are related to software. But that's one point. But the actual point of it is that this is not a full quote. Full quote is with a passage of time and technology, meaning that Hideo Kojima was not talking about a specific game or specific designs applied to a specific game, but to the industry in general. When he did his presentation, when this quote became famous, but actually, the real reason why this quote does not work at all is because actually it meant the opposite. In that presentation, Hideo Kojima was arguing or defending game design as this way to find the solutions. To find elegant solutions, to make ends meet, to make shortcuts, and he was contrasting this with a more what he thought was a more Western approach of brute forcing a way into solutions with just by relying on technology. And so the point of this presentation was that even if he would start relying more on technology from then on, it would still prefer elegant solutions and shortcuts. He would still use the ladder, which is the metaphor that he used to make his point. So that makes 30 points. I guess we've finished the talk. I think we still have time for QA, and yeah, that was it. So let me just pull up the questions. So if I have sources for the presented claims, for example, that why streaming does not drive sales. Yeah. So one of the reasons why I wanted to include this question was actually because there's actually a controversy recently about someone that said that was against streaming, or that was perceived to be against streaming. And the thing is, streaming clearly helps some games, or it seems it has helped some games, but it's not very clear that it helped every game that is streamed. For instance, narrative games or games that rely heavily on cutscenes seem to be hurt by streaming. And actually, like this is a whole subject, and I don't really want to delve into it, but it's not really obvious. But yeah, I can put up some sources, like all the sources actually of all the slides at the end of the talk. Afterwards, on my Twitter feed, maybe, I don't know. What, in your opinion, would be the lowest bar for market research? That's another question. Like, market research is usually like, there's people who, it's a bit like game design, and the game designers hate people that say that that they know game design just because a lot of people think they can design games, and a lot of people think they can do market research, but I have no clue what market research is. I'm not a market analyst myself. What I know is that if I were to do market research myself, I wouldn't be as good as colleagues of mine that I've seen work, which have produced incredible results that I cannot replicate. And I've actually seen game designers trying to do informal market research, and the lowest bar, to answer your question, would be I've actually seen someone go on Google Trends, which it does no reliable. It's not really a reliable metric, or wasn't 5 years ago, for instance, and use I'm not like, now I don't recall the word, but a thing to measure on the screen, pixel by pixel, the graphs of Google Trends, and then he presented that as the reason why we should do game A or game B. So not only was it not the proper way to analyze the data that he was trying to access, but that data itself didn't have any values, and so he had to come up with a way to read the graph on the screen, even though there were no numbers, like by measuring on the screen itself. Okay, so thank you.